Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nerdy for 30, the podcast where we talk about nerdy-ish movies for 30-ish minutes. My name is Kevin Bauer, a.k.a. the Critic's Choice. With me, as always, is the People's Champ, Tim Keck. And today, we're talking about D&D Honor Among Thieves. And if you've ever played D&D, you know you need a Dungeon Master around. That's why we invited your favorite Dungeon Master and mine. He's the host of the 20-Sided Podcast and My First Dungeon. Give it up for Brian Flaherty.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Hey, anytime, man. Excited you're here. I feel like I have a lot of D&D related questions now.
Ooh, I've got a lot of D&D related answers, baby. Let's go. Let's go.
D&D adjacent answers. Well, let's dig into it. Brian, you have by far the most experience with D&D on this podcast. Actually, I think we have a pretty good cross-section because, Brian, you are a Dungeon Master. You host many D&D and tabletop role-playing game podcasts. You have an extensive history with the art form. I've played a little bit. I've dabbled in the world. And Tim, to my knowledge, has never played at all. Is that correct?
I played like 5 times in a campaign. Brian did, I think.
I was going to say, me and Tim played a little bit.
Yeah, we played a little bit a long time ago, and it was good. I mean, dungeons are one of the few things I haven't mastered, so I'm excited. I think I'm the low man on the totem pole as far as, you know, D&D experience, but
and you know that's okay.
As far as movie watching goes, I think I'm up there with the best, and I enjoyed this guy. What'd you guys think of the movie?
It was a lot of fun. It was just a good time. It's one of those movies, like, a lot of people were freaking out about it because of various, like, you know, kind of deep cut things within the D&D sphere. So a bunch of people were like, oh, I'm not going to see it. I'm never going to see it. Fuck Hasbro. Fuck Wizards. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun, and it stands on its own as an action movie. It definitely felt like D&D. With my limited exposure, there was a lot of exposition in it, and there was like an overall tone that was... I was trying to think of the best word for it. I wanted to say lameness, but that's like not it.
No.
There's just like this gamification to the movie, right? Where there's like, why would we do this? Oh, it's because this is like what D&D would have us do, right? Like, I mean, even Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's a game, and you're like in this world, and you can kind of do anything. But with any game, you can't do anything, right? There's a set of rules and parameters that make you feel like you can do anything, you know, like Red Dead Redemption. It's an open world concept. You're running around. You can kill anybody. But like, you know, you can't shake somebody's hand in it. You can't like drive a car. There's still limits on like what the world is. Right. And it felt like that in the movie. There were these like limits on it that were like, oh, but this is like a D&D thing. This is why we're explaining this so much here. This is why we're like diving into this so much. It definitely feels like if you have that relationship with D&D, you get, obviously it's a Dungeons and Dragons movie, but if you have that relationship, you get way more out of this, I think, than just, you know, a plebeian like me.
It was really nice to see an action movie that didn't go like super dark, like so many action movies are these days. And it was just like, kind of campy fun. Like there aren't a lot of those coming out recently. And I think I knew I was in good hands. Like with at the end of the opening montage when first off, there was an Aarakocra named Jarnathan, which is like the most D&D NPC name I've ever heard. It's just you take a normal name and add like a P or a B or an F or something, and it's a whole other thing. But like, yeah, the end of that first scene where they like grab the Aarakocra, jump out the window, hoping that he'll like fly them to safety, and then it's revealed that like, oh no, we were gonna pardon you, is the most fucking D&D thing. It was a great way to start the movie.
Dude, it was Lauren kept leaning over and saying which people we've played with in the past would make those kinds of moves. And it was so funny because I can see things playing out, like the idea dawning in Chris Pine's mind. And just how that would play out in a D&D game of like, yeah, can I do a perception check on the strength of that window? Just like little details like that. I mean, I think, though, like those touches are definitely there for people that are very into the world. But in general, the thing that they did that I think mirrored D&D most closely, at least in my experience, is that it is silly. It does have that level of campiness. It does have that level of not being too involved in the world. Because the thing that normally puts me off of fantasy is that high fantasy self-seriousness. Not always the darkness that you described, Brian, but definitely can go there in terms of like, it's very stiff. It's very rigid. People speak in affected British-ish accents and don't fluctuate from that. And the music is always operatic and nobody's ever going to drop in like a song from Jet or the White Stripes or something. But D&D, granted, my experience, I have literally only ever played with comedians, but D&D has always been an extremely fun experience where obviously there is a reality of the world and you want to try to honor that base reality in some way. But for the most part, people just kind of fuck around. So
honestly, even the most serious game has so much levity in it because like think about doing like a grimdark, D&D series or D&D game where you're just like, yes, we've ventured underneath the mines and we've been traveling for 6 days and we have all of our stuff. And you can only do that for like a session or two, maybe before someone's got to be like cracking a joke. Like you just got to relieve that. You can't operate on that level of tension forever. You got to have the silliness and the campiness and the fun that is really what makes D&D, especially these days.
What's that adage too? There's that old adage where it's like,
Kevin,
Tim, go.
We got to figure this out. You go. You got it. You're doing it.
I just want to dovetail on what Brian said. There's that old adage where the most serious D&D campaigns end up being the silliest, and the ones that start off the silliest end up being these epic operatic adventures by the end of them.
I think, whatever you started out as, it's never going to be what you planned it to be. Just because it is, an improvised game of yes and building on each other. And when you maintain or when you come in with an idea of something, very quickly your ideas get destroyed. Like if you come in with a character that has like a full backstory, there's a great quote, I think from like Eisenhower. No, I think it was Napoleon. I don't know. But it's no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And it's like, that's what every D&D game ends up being. No matter how much you plan as a game master, no matter how much you like build as a player, the first time someone gives you a decision, everything's fucked. Like everything is different than what you planned. I've never once properly predicted what my player group was going to be doing. And I've played hundreds, if not thousands of hours of Dungeons and Dragons.
Do you think that's a more modern take on the game? Because I feel like I've seen now or know so many people who are just kind of making up their own campaigns and winging it. And there's like, all these, popular D&D shows and things online and podcasts, and you host several of them. And people are just kind of making these things up and just going with it. And it's obviously a lot of comedians, improvisers. But I feel like when I associate D&D with something, it's like textbooks and homework. And there's like that cardboard wall that goes up and there's like so many calculations you have to do and it's rigid and you go into this dungeon and there and then you flip to the page and it tells you what to do. And I don't feel like I know anybody who's taking it that seriously anymore. Do you think that's like a new thing or how it's always been?
There is still a community of people that do like these grim dark, like one of the most successful Kickstarters of the past year, I think, was a woman named Kelsey Dione, I believe out in like Nevada or Las Vegas, created a series called, I believe it's called Shadow Dark. And it's basically taking old like 1E type style adventures. So like real grimdark, like Grognard, first edition, like delving into caves and like no one has dark vision. You've got to have torches, but updating it for like a 5e rule set. So I think there is still an audience that does that because there is some like nostalgia to that of, having your like calculating Thaco scores and having the grids of things and having to do the like calculus and geometry of playing this fun game with your friends. But I think the popularity of things like Critical Role, Dimension 20, the Adventure Zone has really sprung to life this idea of anyone can kind of pull together their own adventure. And this is D&D and tabletop role-playing games of similar varieties are just such a great engine for storytelling. It's such a great way for anyone, even if you're not familiar with like, the hero's journey or, Campbellian narratives or whatever, to come in, read some of these things, use the tools that are available within the system to like build a character and build a setting and build a campaign, and all of a sudden be off to the races with your friends. And ultimately, I think like all this gets back to is playing pretend with your friends. Like, yes, there are rules, but the first rule in every D&D handbook, I think like since the beginning, for sure it's the first rule in the 5e handbook, is if any of these rules don't work for your table, forget about them. Like, we say a thing on My First Dungeon, the podcast that I host, that is, if you're having fun, you're already doing it right. And that's really the like ethos that I think modern role-playing games have taken. They've moved. There's still a lot of rules, and the rules are a structure that help you get to the place. But the second they get in your way, they fall away.
I think narratively, that was their approach to this movie as well. The thing that keeps coming up for me with this movie is how similar it felt to me to the 2009 relaunch of Star Trek, which is just a fucking phenomenal movie.
Sure.
So much fun, and it's similarly rooted in this really stiff piece of like counterculture, like not mainstream culture, I guess, when you think of mainstream culture back then being like jocks and cheerleaders. And yet this reboot was able to make it really accessible to a mainstream audience and kind of not pick and choose what parts they wanted to include in that narrative, but be very selective with how they were deployed so that it's set dressing if you don't want to pay very much attention to it. But if you do want to pay attention to it, you can see that it is consistent with what you know. Yeah,
for sure. It was fun to see that. I mean, this is that, like, you know, there's a cynical side to me that this is definitely Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro specifically staking D&D out as like, this is intellectual property. And like saying, you know, Zaz Tam and, you know, Red Wizards of Thay and Owlbear, and like saying all their like IP properties. But it is really cool to see those things like come to life. Like seeing an Owlbear was like, yeah, it's fucking cool.
Oh my God, it's amazing. On that same note, let's go into some beefs and thieves. Let's start off with Thieves. Let's fire up on this thing because I think we all really enjoyed this movie. Tim, what were some of your biggest thieves in this thing?
I think my two biggest thieves were, I thought the fight scene at the end was amazing. It was really good. I had very limited D&D knowledge, but I could tell they're doing different spells and things, and it feels like they're rolling and something's hitting, something's not. It felt to me, because I was already, by that time you're in the D&D mindset. So I'm thinking, what are people rolling right now? Like what's the strategy? They're like, these people are talking to each other and planning it. And to see something that in real, that in like D&D time is like an hour-long conversation play out in 3 minutes.
Short. Yeah.
I was like, that's kind of amazing. Like, this is what people are describing when it's like a player takes a swing, someone else takes a swing, they dodge, they take a and I even thought at one point somebody must have rolled a 1 because they get like caught in a bubble and are like rolled like a million blocks away, and I'm like, oh, so now Chris Pine has to take a turn to like get back here. It was like, I just thought it was such a perfect it represented the ideal, I think, of what, like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons combat can be.
There is something interesting to keep in mind. So for anyone who hasn't played Dungeons and Dragons, the combat portion is the most like rules forward part. Like everyone rolls for initiative, so you decide what the order is. You roll for your attack. You take whatever you roll on a 20-sided die. You add a modifier to it based on your character sheet, and compare that to a difficulty class, a DC that the Dungeon Master sets. And all of that happens like for each person's turn. It can get kind of complicated when you get to higher levels. So when you do a battle, it's incredibly epic and it's fun. It flies by when you're playing it, but it can take like multiple hours. And the other thing to remember is that every round of combat, so like me going, then Kevin going, then Tim going, then all the enemies going, that round, all of us together, is 6 seconds. 6 seconds of time. So you play this game for like hours and you do like, you know, 7 rounds of combat, but that is what, like 50 some seconds or 42 seconds. It's wild. And it is fun to see in that battle. So there was 2 parts that I really loved of it. And it was the Red Wizard of Thay, who are like, you know, classic D&D villains, using a spell called Misty Step, which is like a very common bonus action spell where you get to teleport 60 feet. And it's like, it's a spell that's used so often you just kind of forget how like fucking cool it is. And then you see her like, oh, she's about to get hit, or she gets hit, and then she teleports across the other building. Oh, teleports across the other building. And that was fucking cool. And then there is a mechanic in D&D 5th edition called concentration. So when a spellcaster casts a spell, so something like in the movie, the Red Wizard she animates the like dragon sculpture, and it keeps attacking Chris Pine. What she has to do with that mechanically is she has to hold her concentration on it. So she's got to essentially like pay attention to that spell, stay concentrated on the spell. So when she gets hit with like a slingshot from the druid, it breaks her concentration, which is why it like stops attacking Chris Pine, which was really cool to see this like very core mechanic of the game actually play out in the movie. It was one of those things where I was just like geeking out of like, this is really fucking cool.
Dude, it was amazing. It's so fun to see like those little details mapped into the like quote unquote real world, like seeing that play out. I don't think I've ever seen it play out in video like that before. So Tim mentioned like people rolling a 1. Again, if you've never played D&D before, you can have what's called a critical hit, or critical success, or a critical failure. Critical success is when you roll a 20 on a 20-sided die, because that's the highest you can get. Usually you not only accomplish what you're trying to do, but you do it awesomely. So if you're trying to open a door, you roll a 20, you might blow that fucker off its hinges. Rolling a 1 would be a critical failure. And usually shit goes so bad. So like if you're trying to open a door and you roll a 1, you probably not only don't open the door, but maybe you break your shoulder on it trying to look cool. A perfect illustration in this movie is, I think, my biggest thief, which is the scene where the illusion of Chris Pine breaks down.
Yeah.
Unbelievably funny, and how long they held on it and how much funnier it kept getting as the illusion broke down. I mean, I wasn't prepared for this to be a funny movie in the first place. And then to see that, it was like, oh my God, it's phenomenal what they've accomplished with this thing.
It's funny too, because that joke could have really fallen flat. Like it is like a weird kind of like CGI joke in like a fantasy movie, and it fucking slapped. It was so funny. I'm trying to think of other thieves. Owlbear, dope.
My other thief was the theft in the cart.
Oh,
because that felt exactly like something you would do. You would talk about it on the table, and the dungeon master's like, hey, this thing's in the cart. What do you guys want to do? And they're like, well, if I put this portal on this and we do that, and then we have it, and then like you roll something, you fail, now you're falling out of the cart. Now it just felt like so it felt so extra to do it that it felt like a D&D thing to me.
It felt so D&D in that, yeah, it's like way extra. You're doing way more. It's like unnecessarily cool. Like, It's like undeniably like everyone thought of way more practical ideas going around that table. And then they're like, what if we have a hither-thither staff and we like portal into the thing and we hide the portal and we smuggle the portal in? Like, that's the thing that everyone around the table would get super fucking excited about because it's fucking awesome. It's so cool. I love it.
I want to bring back a category that we launched on the Rennies, because I think that this movie and our next movie, John Wick 4, are both deserving of it. This is fuck you, no way. So this is a sequence that happened in the movie that made you go, fuck you, no way. That's amazing. For me, it was the animal transformations. I am not normally into like druids as a D&D class. I feel like when I saw trailers for this movie, I had kind of pinned that druid as a character that I wasn't going to connect with very much, because she seemed like kind of the representative of the very stiff high fantasy world. Mm-hmm. You're like in an ensemble cast, that character that's like of the like, usually it's an elf, like that character that's like of the like higher class that's like always morally upright. They're always kind of the one that's like not on board with the plan and calling out the characters that are being fun, and they usually just kind of stop the fun from happening. The action scenes where she is transforming into these different animals were so fucking cool. We've talked so much on this podcast about how special effects are almost their own genre at this point, and how there are so many movies like the Harry Potter, the Dumbledore spinoffs, the Fantastic Beasts, whatever they are, that have these intense special effects sequences that are pretty cool, but don't really serve to move anything forward in the story or the plot. And seeing how difficult it is for her to be able to assume all these different shapes and escape from this red witch, I mean, it was tremendous. I was really thrilled.
I will say that this isn't a beef that I have, but it is a beef that the D&D community has a little bit, because so the scene when she is spying on the Red Wizard and the Lord of Neverwinter, played by Hugh Grant, when she's
crushing
who's crushing it. Hugh Grant crushed it in this movie. But when she has to escape, she shape changes, she wild shapes like 5 times, which is well beyond what you can do as a druid. And also, technically, you can't wild shape into an owlbear. So it's like one of the few times where they kind of like bend the rules. And actually, to be fair to them, they released the stat blocks online, so you can go see like what all these characters' stats are. And in her stat block, they very clearly were like, yeah, she could wild shape 5 times and she could go into an owlbear. So it's just kind of like an asterisk they added in. They're like, yeah, she could do it. Which I'm fine with. Because you know, the one other thing that was like kind of rules adjacent, or like something they didn't quite follow, is that both druids and bards, so her character and Chris Pine's character, canonically are spellcasters. Like bards can cast spells, and so can druids. Druids being primary spellcasters, like doing a lot of spellcasting. And neither of them did it. And they didn't do it in the world. So like, I'm kind of okay with letting her do a bunch more wild shapes, but she can't do like tidal wave. You know, it's fair.
I'm surprised the druids are like the lame ones, because the only campaign I played as a character named Jim Keck, who was a human druid, and I owned a zoo, and my whole thing was that when people came to the zoo, I would run and turn into the animal they were going to look at before
yeah,
before
it was just
they
you.
got
I forgot about that. Oh, that was such a good bit.
And so I had to do like a guided tour of the zoo where I'm slowly becoming one of each animal. It was very fun. I had a great time with it. I know druids were supposed to suck.
They don't, like, druids are, if you take like all the classes to like 20th level, druids will often win, because they have like crazy powerful spells, and they can just keep transforming into like big ass monsters that have just huge chunks of hit points, that then if you're fighting a druid who like turns into an elephant, you've got to take down all of that elephant's hit points. Then the druid transforms back into their normal shape. You got to take down all those hit points before they transform back into an elephant. And so they just like have this hit point sink that allows them to soak up damage in a fun way.
Oh man,
it's great.
That rules.
And good stuff.
I love that actress too. Honestly, I love all the actors in this. I think this is a great, as far as sequels go, I think this is like a great like Dungeons and Dragons IP thing going forward, because they can just recast the whole thing, do a completely new campaign, call it Dungeons and Dragons, like keep the same tone, and just keep doing these movies, you know? I think that'd be very fun, but I thought this cast is stacked. These actors are great. Michelle Rodriguez, I thought her delivery was so wooden and awful, but I also think it makes complete sense for a barbarian. And I don't know if it's like a casting thing or just, I don't know if she's like making a choice or if she's just a bad actor and this was great casting. It's it's incredible.
I thought it was a pretty, like, I thought it was a choice. It felt like a choice to me.
Yeah. And her bursting into song randomly was the funniest thing I've ever seen. I haven't laughed that hard since Jackass Forever. That was like top tier comedy. Yeah. I think earlier I said lame. What was it? Oh man, campy. That's the word. That you guys have been saying campy a lot. It is campy. That's campy the word I was looking for.
It's like that's definitely not pejorative. It's trying to do a thing and it is succeeding in doing that thing.
Absolutely. The practical effects?
Oh, the practical effects were great. Actually, phenomenal. Here's the thief. Here's the thief. Thief of all thieves, our man Jarnathan. Jarnathan
was the best.
We stand at Jarnathan. Jarnathan is the best. I hope he comes back in every movie, and honestly, I think he will. Also, Renee Jean Page as like the paladin NPC that's like
Yes.
way too lawful good was beautiful. Just no notes. Also, beautiful man.
Pat Wise pitched a way better way that they should have played the post-credit scenes, which was, we get the post-credit scene, I guess it was Matt Mercer, the host of Critical Role?
Critical Role.
That was dressed up as the zombie at the end, and so that was kind of like a little tag with him.
Oh, is that
But
true?
I guess. That's what I heard some people saying on the way out of the theater.
Really?
That's anecdotal research.
Wow.
But Pat had the idea that it should have been, the post-credit scene should have been Reggae Jean Page hunting down Hugh Grant. That moment was phenomenal, and that would have gotten an explosion if it happened after a little bit of credits.
Yeah.
It was so good.
I was going to say we got that. We got that at the end of the movie, but it would have been better after. But the end of the movie also felt like the end of a campaign, right? Where like, you know, the dungeon master gives little exposition on everybody and we wrap up all the stories. It felt very fun to like see all these little things. And the only thing I was thinking about was that the cemetery scene was honestly great. The questions were fun. And I was like, as soon as they left without that guy, I'm like, well, that's going to be the end credits scene.
Yeah.
is coming back to this guy. They have to call this back at some point. Well, otherwise, why do it?
Well, calling it back at some point leads us directly into my next question that I had for you guys. We're getting close to the end, but I have a couple things to wrap up. This is a segment, Tim, that I want to pitch to you called Franchise Opportunity. This movie made $71.5 million in its opening weekend on a $150 million budget.
Hey, good for them.
Great for them. I'm just starting to learn more about the budgeting side of this since we've been talking about it with RRR. I looked it up. It said that usually you can expect a movie to make 3 to 5 times its opening weekend gross over its lifespan in theaters, which means that this thing is going to get a franchise if that happens.
Oh, yeah.
So my question
for
for you two, what actors would you like to see in the sequels, and what character class would you want them to play?
So we didn't see a rogue. I guess the Hugh Grant is probably like a mastermind rogue, but we didn't see like a sneaky skullduggery, you know, hiding in the shadows rogue. So I feel like we need that. But I don't know. Who do I want it to be?
I mean, this is like a nerdy podcast, but I think the tone that Marvel takes with a lot of stuff would flow effortlessly into Dungeons and Dragons. Like
Yeah,
you could pick any Marvel star, drop them in the Dungeons and Dragons universe, give them a thing, and they would absolutely crush it. I'm trying to think of like, you know, grabbing Chris Hemsworth and giving him like the exact opposite of Thor to play would be fun. I was just trying to think of like opposites for all these guys, but
I really want to see, and I feel like they would maybe do this, is the last Dungeons and Dragons movie, which was like widely panned, the star of it, or one of the stars of it, one of the biggest cast members was Jeremy Irons. Is he still alive? He's still alive, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So having him come back and like do a role that's actually good might be, like, I feel like people would come out for that as like a fun bit.
I think that'd be great.
Who's the guy that's married to Sofia Vergara and he has like a whole
Joe Manganiello.
Joe Manganiello.
Yeah, Joe Manganiello, and he's got like the Vince Vaughn crew, and like they should just mine those guys and just get them in a movie.
I was surprised we didn't see at like one call out to, because like, you know, D&D has like a big community of people who play games online for fun, and it's, you know, Critical Role, and all of those people are professional voice actors and actors. Dimension 20, Joe Manganiello and like his Hollywood crew, which is like a private game but still like very well known. I was surprised there wasn't like one call out in there or like one little cameo, which would have been fun. I would love to see that.
Yeah, I definitely saw the actors talking about Brennan Lee Mulligan before and hoping he likes the movie, and I was like, oh boy, our boy's making it.
Yeah, shout out Brennan Mulligan, former improv coach of the show.
Is that true?
It's true. Yeah. He was good times. Great dude.
He was my coach for a long time.
I got one more thing to highlight before we wrap this up. Scorecasting. We came in low on this one when we did scorecasting at the beginning of the year.
What did you guys scorecast it as?
So our average that we thought this was going to be was an 87%. The real average as of today is a 93%.
Wow.
Of the two of us, I was closer with 89%, but who's keeping track of that?
Wow.
Seems like you're
you
keeping
are.
track of that.
you're
guess you're
definitely
right.
going out of your way to
You
keep track of
showed
it.
me the Excel file. It's a very complicated Excel file.
Yeah, that's going to be in
Yeah.
both your inboxes.
Okay.
You really manipulated all the numbers so you win in every category.
That is correct. Yeah.
Kevin, I have another Nerdy for 30 question for you.
Hit me, Tim.
Is Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, is it better or worse than The Woman King?
I think this is better than The Woman King.
Is it better or worse than Creed 3?
I think it's better than Creed 3.
Whoa!
Oof.
I haven't seen three. I haven't seen either of these movies. I need to see them.
Is it better than Everything Everywhere?
I've seen that one.
I mean, like, as a piece of media, probably no.
Wait.
I would like to rewatch
What
this
is the
one more.
other option other than as a piece of media?
That's it. Is Dungeons and Dragons better than Everything Everywhere all at once?
As a thing in my heart, I'm going to rewatch this more times than I'm going to watch Everything Everywhere.
I will
And
say I will
adore
100%
that.
rewatch this more.
Yeah.
I do
that's
think
where it's going.
like how many times you rewatch it is a very good metric of not necessarily what is better, but what you like better. What gets you off more.
Yeah.
We're ranking all of our movies that we talk about this year, Brian, and it is getting upsetting. This is a weird.
What's like top 3 right now?
Top
Give me a
3 is
little
The
preview.
Last of Us, Bahubali
Okay.
2, and now Dungeons and Dragons.
Wow. I stand by it.
And then what's like bottom 3?
Knock on the Cabin, Ant-Man 3, and Avatar: The Way of Water.
Stand
Avatar:
by
The
it.
Way of Water.
Yeah. Garbage movie.
Kevin doesn't like it. It's at the bottom. It's his fault.
I had a good time. I like the story is not that great, but it was
You're
fun.
both maniacs. You're both maniacs.
see.
We're running
I
out
think-
of time. I got to cut off all this Avatar talk.
All right, D&D.
Brian, thank you so much for being on the pod. What do you have to promote?
Oh yeah. So I run a podcast called My First Dungeon. It is a show where we help game masters learn new games and make each one better than the last. We've got a new season that is premiering on Friday, April 7th. With 2 episodes. We're not playing D&D. We're playing a different tabletop role-playing game called Die, which is based on and made in conjunction with the 3-time Hugo nominated comic of the same name, which if you like D&D and want to see a very pitch black, dark horror fantasy twist on it, you should read Die the comic and play this game. But we're doing an 8-episode podcast event, which includes interviews with the creators and the publisher, a 6-episode actual play series that is fully sound designed, has original music. We have an original soundtrack, and features players like Nathan Yaffe from Drawfee, Carolyn Page from Dropout, Draconics from a million different actual plays online, Chinook Tessera, who performs off-Broadway in The Art of Killing It, Abby Hepworth, who's in the 20-Sided Podcast, and myself. And honestly, we've been working on it for like 6 months now. I'm finishing the edit on the last episode, and it's honestly like we fucking nailed it. It's really fucking good. There's some things I make where I'm like, I don't know, who cares? This one, fucking great. Go check it out.
Oh, hell yeah. Thank you so much again for being here. We're almost out of time. Tim, thank you. Write us in the show and let us know who you want to add to the franchise and what character class you want them to play. Email us, nerdyfor30@gmail.com. We'll be back here next week with John Wick 4. Till then, stay nerdy, everybody. Bye.
Stay nerdy. Bye. Thanks, Brian.
Thank
No
you.
problem. You want me to send you a .wav file?
Sure, that'd be great. I'd take a
Yeah.
wow.
Cool.
Sorry, I was giving you the, I'm like, is this less than a minute? I'm like, oh my God, don't let him get cut off.
Oh
in
yeah, I saw it. Actually, like right as you were doing that, I was like, ooh, it's up at the top there.
Well, now that we are about to get cut off, what do you guys